We're back.
We're back.
In Hot Take Central. I think this is officially episode 52. We're a little...
Third or fourth of the year? Third? Fourth of the year?
I think
fourth.
Fourth
Of the year. First one I've gotten on the mic for, so
yeah,
it's pretty fun.
I'm not sure if we're going to air episode 51. It was a chaotic mess. The internet went down. So I think we're just going to... if numbers are going to go straight from 50 to 52.
All right. I mean, we could just see how it goes, but
I'll send you a clip or two so we can preview maybe a little bit later.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, I am Noah. That's Owen.
Yeah.
I know we've gotten some feedback of who the heck are these people. So now you know.
Yeah. Junior in high school, play ice hockey and lacrosse, and just kind of here as a hobby, just something to clear my mind.
Yeah, you don't get paid. We all get paid.
I don't need to get paid. I don't need the money. It's just, it's not worth the money, in my opinion. But yeah.
All right. You wanted to talk some NHL?
Yeah, we could. I mean, there's not a lot going on in the hockey world right now, but kind of some big moves over the summer, especially with the draft. Kirby Dach going to the Montreal Canadiens. I think they could be a force this year. I think it's a hit or miss for them. I think the moves that they've done could either be.
So, like, what are your breakout teams this year?
I think the Avalanche will have a strong return. Came off a very good Stanley Cup win.
Yeah.
Very, very dominant performance throughout the entire playoffs. I think they'll be strong this year. I think Tampa Bay will be strong this year. I think New York Rangers will be strong this year. Lost a couple guys in Andrew Kopp, but also gained Vince Trocheck. So I think that's a huge weapon to add to their roster.
Who's their goalie?
Shesterkin.
Oh, Shesterkin. That's my guy.
Definitely. I think he and Vasilevsky are at the same level, just like when it comes to raw skill. But I think Vasilevsky, when you put him in a playoff position like he was in, like when you put him and Shesterkin in the same playoff position, like very close game, I think, Vasilevsky will have the upper hand of like being a veteran and stuff.
Well, Shesterkin, he was a rookie or second year player?
I think it's been his like third or fourth year like in the league. I think he's like 21 or something, super young though.
Yeah, but who's it was the Tampa, right? Tampa, What's his name?
Vasilevsky.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to be able to get it. But he's much more, he was like 35, right? Or much more experienced. So that's that upper hand in the playoffs.
Yeah, I also think like Tampa Bay as a whole, like they have a very strong veteran group there that's been through a lot, like especially with their Stanley Cup win in the bubble in the past year, 2021, and then going very deep into the playoffs this past year. I think like, you could argue like, oh yeah, their legs are kind of, they're getting a lot more tired and old, but like that's what everyone thought going into this series against the Rangers, and they got off to a slow start, but then they ultimately came back and kind of plowed through them. But I think like people are still underestimating them and just saying, oh, they're old, they're not going to be able to make a deep run. But I think people are kind of like, they're not like thinking about how important like having the deep run playoff experience could be.
Yeah, especially like you kind of see it across all sports. Like, don't want to be the one to say it, but like even golf, you're deep in a round, you're deep on a hole, you're deep in a tournament or playoffs, and the people who've been there before, while maybe didn't have as great of a regular season, really kind of come into their element. Whereas, it's only something that experience can give you. Which kind of what we saw with Shesterkin and Vasilevsky.
Yeah, I think like to kind of connect that to golf is what you were saying is like, you put a guy like, I guess like you could even consider Scheffler. Like he hasn't really been in like first group or like last group on Sunday in a lot of his matches, like up until 2022. But like when you put him against Woods, like let's just think about like or just anyone against Tiger Woods, like a guy who's just been there, like constantly, like always fighting for the win, like never, like up until like he had his incidents, he was just the best. Like you couldn't ask for a better player. But I think like even after his experiences, having that experience of being up in the top, like with the most pressure, I think like having that advantage is like something people don't really consider a lot. Like it's definitely considered in conversation of like who's going to win, but I think like it really, really helps.
Yeah, it's something that like you kind of know for your leaders. Like you could say Tom Brady. Oh well, he's got all this experience. Well, also those role players, coaches who have the same experience as well, along with having your star or whatever. Can really bring a team along, kind of what we're seeing in Tampa Bay. Like those are a lot of experienced individuals, like through their whole coaching staff as well. I know it's John
Cooper.
John Cooper, thank you. He set up a really good coaching staff, or really well established coaching staff over there in Tampa.
Yeah, I think like to your point, it also or similarly, like it also depends on the sport. Like you said, golf, I think you can kind of extend that past a certain age, like a little bit farther than football, for sure. And then, but I think like with the very physical sports like football and hockey, and even basketball, I think like there are limitations. Like at some point, LeBron James's experience, while it will help him a lot, his athleticism won't be there to keep up and win a championship. Now, am I saying that's going to happen this next year or in the next 4 years? Not really, but at some point, if he doesn't retire, like people will get slower. Like that's just the human nature. Like you can't expect someone to be as like better than they would when they were in their like quote unquote prime than they are now. Now, I will say there are some scenarios where it's kind of the opposite. Like Steven Stamkos, that guy has started to play way better than he ever has, even as he's gotten older. Like there's just some guys that are just like that and play better when they get older because I guess they've had experience or they're just more comfortable playing that way. But I'd say for most guys, losing that piece of athleticism and getting older really hurts them.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, you want to do a quick transition? As you said, experience counts in football. Does it count in fantasy football? Do you want your guy? Are we more like we did a mock draft last round that hopefully will never come to light, but Drew did very well. But I picked Tom Brady, and it was ranked as, even though in the NFL 100 he was number one, right? Mm-hmm. I picked Brady, and he's 9 in potential fantasy. In fantasy. How is that different? Because like fantasy doesn't make a playoff run, so we don't want that.
I think the playoff run's a big thing because I think when you consider like who's the best quarterback of all time, obviously Tom Brady, but it's because of his Super Bowls. Whereas like he's not as good as a fantasy quarterback as Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson would be because they just go off every week. But I think it's less about in like when you're talking about a full season playoffs, close games, winning as a team. I think that's when like a guy like Tom Brady is going to shine a lot more than Lamar Jackson. But I think like a guy like Lamar or Mahomes is going to get that spotlight of being like a really good quarterback because they produce a lot in fantasy. I think fantasy football has changed has changed the NFL in the sense that like people base a player's skill off of their fantasy performance. And I think, that kind of shades away like the actual skill of like a lineman or like a defender who is really good at doing their job, helps their team win big games in playoffs and in the Super Bowl, but just they don't really have a ton of numbers that like are just produced on a person's phone every week. But I think like they are talked about, like a guy like Nick Bosa, like he's talked about all the time. but that guy's a superstar, and like he is noticeably like up there with his talent. But then there's guys like Trent Williams, like everyone knows he's good, but you just don't see it as much on a screen because, you know, he's not getting points.
Yeah, he's not. It's hard to. It's demeaning the players who don't have a way to score their own points for their own position, right? Mm-hmm. Like linemen, D linemen, though they are trying. I know for defense, I'm sure it's been that way for a while, but you can draft defensive players or set up your league that way, but that is not common. And I'm with you. It makes them less known, less of a celebrity. Like even though like you're like, oh, he's not a celebrity. Mahomes is like, I think he's kind of past the point of being a good quarterback. Like you could say, Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. And he's now like, that guy is people who are drafting, like people are drafting that guy in fantasy just because they know his name instead of, is that making sense? I'm not sure if that.
I mean, yeah, I guess so. It's just kind of like, I guess you're kind of talking about how someone who has had a lot of, like, I guess, attention and a spotlight, then just being like, it has given them a name and their identity is based off of them being really good and doing these flashy plays and winning games. And I'll credit Mahomes. Like, he does both really well. He is flashy and he can win games. And he certainly did that in the 2019-2020 season. But I think when you kind of talk about like the attention that players get, I think if you're going off of pure impact and how a person helps win a game, I think there are guys like Trent Williams who have the same impact as a guy like Keenan Allen.
Yeah.
But it's just not seen on paper, and Keenan Allen will seem like, or just any top receiver will seem better because they have that like fantasy uphold.
I agree. Defund ESPN fantasy football until we get O-linemen.
I know. They should do a defense fantasy football based only, no offensive players. Imagine if they flipped fantasy
for a season.
For a season, just like interceptions same as touchdowns, or like pick six same as touchdowns, and then everything was about turnovers and defense.
That would,
and then you know, offense only hurts you. So like a pick would negative points, but like a touchdown would give you like 2 or 3 points on defense. So that means like if a team gets 4 touchdowns and a field goal, like let's say field goal counts 1, touchdown counts as 3, an offense gets 3 touchdowns, that would be 9 points. That's essentially the same as like an average defense. So
yeah,
that'd be an interesting way to do fantasy football.
Instead of having a defense and special teams slot, you have just an offense spot. And you pick your offense.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
That would be really fun.
Like, what players would you have? Like, would you do linebacker? Like, what do you think would be the highest production spot?
Trayvon Diggs.
No. I'm saying like position wise. Do you think DB or corner or?
So last year we did a thing where you could have one defensive player, and I went through and kind of set up what I thought was a fair scoring metric for each position. Like an interception was like, I think probably 3 or 4 points. Maybe I think it was 4 points, but the best players were cornerbacks because they got the most swatted balls, they got the most close coverage or whatever. And I wanted to go back and do that this year. I got vetoed pretty quickly because it kind of it broke the scale almost. You could have Trayvon Diggs out here who was basically playing wide receiver for the other team, have like almost 20 points, which can totally change a game, and that's not really what the position of defensive player was supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Welcome back, Jude. We were just talking about how much fun it would be. I mean, maybe not much fun, but how interesting it would be to have a
fantasy football like scoring reversed, which means in the defensive slot you'd have a team's offense, and in the other positions like quarterback, running back, wide receiver, you'd have like DB, safety, linebacker, the end. And then we were saying how there's a lot of impact players, like take Nick Bosa, for example. Like, yes, he's popular and stuff, but like he has more impact, arguably, than a guy like,
Keenan Allen was thrown around.
Keenan Allen or like a popular wide receiver. Like he has more impact than him, but Keenan Allen is shown more in the news and in the paper because he has that fantasy uphold that Nick Bosa lacks. So I think that changes kind of the perspective on like how people see football, and they're kind of like only focusing on the offensive players and kind of shying away from the actual impact players on defense.
I agree. The only thing is the reason why defensive players aren't a part of fantasy in most leagues is because there's not as many flashy plays. Like you're really only going to get a sack or a pick.
Yeah.
Or a fumble, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Like no one's going to like, oh, my corner knocked down a pass.
Yeah.
You know?
I think so. Yeah, I think like you have a really good point there. Like honestly, just looking at the ratio from like offensive to defensive highlights, even on an ordinary team's Instagram, it's like just that like showing his highlights. I think it'll be like a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 ratio in favor of offense.
Exactly.
So I think like the reason why a lot of fantasy is focused on offense is because that's what people want to see. Now, I'm not saying like, oh, people should focus on defense. I'm just saying like, how would people's perspective on the game change if fantasy football was defensive based? I mean, like people would celebrate those things a lot more, right?
Yeah. I just don't know how you introduce it. It's like there's such a wall, like an invisible wall, preventing that from happening. But if it had started like that, it would be totally different. And I think defensive players would be paid more. Like there's so many factors that you don't even think about that it's all kind of connected, you know?
And you would consider like defensive players to be a lot more important.
Yeah.
Like you would consider the middle to higher level, like I guess like not superstar level, but kind of like like players that help the teams win games, but they're not as noticed. Mm-hmm.
Or even like a guy like Trent Williams.
That's who I brought up.
Probably, it's probably in the top 3 players in the league.
Yes,
in my opinion, at least.
I agree
because he's so good and so much better than anyone at his position that it's like the impact that he makes on that Niners O-line is insane. Mm-hmm. And I think he's just as valuable as I wouldn't say he's like. So, who do you think is the best player in the league? Just first off,
I think like raw skill. I'd say like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. Aaron Rodgers.
So obviously he's not going to make as much of an impact as them, but he's probably like right in there in that kind of 3 to 5 range.
Yeah,
and I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be impact, like because when you say impact, you think of like.
I think
scoring
a lot of people think of like flashy plays and scoring.
Yeah.
I think just like you mentioned with Trent Williams, like he doesn't like score or make a huge ton of flashy plays.
Yeah.
But like his presence scares offenses, and he will help the team win games in ways that people don't even see because they're so focused on the offense doing well.
Yeah.
Or like an interception or something else.
I liked your comment on defensive players would be paid more.
I think they would. Well, I don't know if it was like I don't know if fantasy would change that, but if the whole mindset was changed, they totally would be. Because you don't think so?
No, I think that's true. I think it's how I'd not thought of that before, but how much fantasy controls kind of public opinion.
Yeah,
like if your stars
would become a defensive game.
If your stars are defensive stars. Like, oh my gosh, Aaron Donald had 4 sacks yesterday, and my team has scored 150 points. That's that would totally change.
What people need to realize is 4 sacks is 4 sacks is just as impressive as a running back having probably like 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, I agree.
At least that's how I feel. You could debate that all day long, but I mean, we can't go and say Aaron Donald is more valuable than Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
You can't say that. It's not correct.
It's just position.
However, yeah, exactly. Defensive guys are so underappreciated that it's like it needs to be somewhat even.
I feel like also it's unique, but whenever you're drafting fantasy, it's like, oh man, my defense, I'm going to pick that in the 15th round or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that itself has kind of created a thing like defense doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, no, I hadn't thought of that before.
Because if you look at, so Myles Garrett is debatably the best defensive player in the league.
Yeah.
He's on what, a 5-year, $100 million?
Something.
And then you compare that to Mahomes, who's on a 10-year, $500 million. Obviously, they're not as valuable, but that's so different. Like
I feel like he's
Myles Garrett
as a receiver, like a high receiver, running back.
Yeah, because receivers now are making the best of the best are making $25 to $30 million a year.
Mm-hmm. So Myles Garrett's getting paid $125 million for 5 years with a $21 million signing bonus. So net
30 a year,
$150 million basically.
Okay, so it's not as bad as I thought, but there's still kind of an imbalance there.
But if you compare him to the best of the best, like I guess a wide receiver or a running back would be a decent comparison.
Like, who would you rather have on if you were starting your own team right now? Would you rather have Myles Garrett or Devontae Adams?
Probably Devontae Adams.
I would probably have Myles Garrett actually.
You think?
Because I think Myles Garrett has a higher chance of winning me more games than Devontae Adams. Because Devontae Adams is not going to get the ball every time he runs a route, whereas Myles Garrett has an opportunity to get a sack every time.
That's true.
The ball is snapped.
I think
receivers and running backs, they're not going to get the ball every play, whereas they're not going to get a chance to make something happen every play, whereas a lineman has that chance.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. I don't think there's really a wrong answer to that question, but I think the overall thing is defensive players should be paid more, to an extent. I'm not saying pay Myles Garrett the same as Patrick Mahomes. No one's saying that. But you can bump that contract up a little bit.
Well, I mean, he's playing for the Browns.
Yeah.
They sold house to pay that.
He should have walked, but that's a different story.
You could just build progressive field too. So you could build progressive field too.
That's his job.
That money.
Yeah. He's getting paid a lot to do his job.
But, being on the Browns sucks.
Yeah.
What else have you guys been talking about?
Maybe talked a little bit about hockey.
Talked a little bit about how, it kind of started with hockey, and then we kind of talked about the playoffs, and then we kind of transitioned towards how veteran experience helps, teams win. And I was kind of saying that it kind of changes throughout the sport, but I think you saw a team like Tampa Bay Lightning and you were like, wow, they're so old but they still win games, but it's they have all this experience. But then it's but then I was saying to an extent, a guy can't play forever, so he's going to slow down at some point. But I just think people don't realize I guess that players are still capable, they're professional athletes.
Yeah.
We talked about how, especially in the playoffs, who would you rather have someone who might have been a star all year, but is on the younger side of that sport, whatever that is, or you have someone who maybe is more of 10th best, but been in the sport much longer, has much more experience, and how in the playoffs that usually evens out or goes in more favor of the more experienced.
Yeah.
Then we kind of transitioned into how that impacts fantasy football and NFL and such.
You can look at Jason Tatum.
I think
he's one of the best players.
Let's think of two
league.
guys we can compare.
Yeah.
So we want to find a guy that's for veterans who's not great, but he's not bad. Would you
they're professional athletes,
I think
so they're usually pretty.
Steph Curry is
someone
too good to be.
Steph's too good.
LeBron's too good.
LeBron's too good.
Clay.
He didn't. you need someone who's going to make a bigger impact in the playoffs than Clay did.
Oh, Al Horford.
Damian Lillard.
Sure,
Actually,
Dame. So compare Jason Tatum to Dame right now. Most people would say
Jason's a little bit
better. I would take Dame in the playoffs all day long
because
he's a veteran. He's at this point in his career, he's a veteran.
Yeah,
I agree.
And he has experience. And we just saw Jason Tatum in the playoffs kind of
choke.
He didn't play well at all.
No.
Yeah, he fell apart.
What time's community time over?
We go till 20.
Okay.
Or the show goes till 20. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We got plenty of time.
But yeah.
Thanks for stopping by. I'm not sure where Eli was.
Yeah, we were getting the team for intramurals. So it's like me, you,
Perfect.
Eli.
I'm glad you put my name on that. I was talking to you about that.
Liam, Nate Turkington, Rohan's the coach.
Good.
Perfect.
Jack. I don't know.
Perfect.
Anyway,
Dialed.
Lions 9-8, wild card Super Bowl.
Oh my gosh. Well, actually,
No chance to get to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but
I think
wild card's possible.
I think they'll win. I think they'll find a way to squeak to win a wild card game.
Yes.
No, I think Goff is going to have the best year of his career.
There it is. He's been to 2 Pro Bowls. People forget that.
And he did go to a Super Bowl.
He did go to a Super Bowl, and a lot of people blame that on him. I blame it on Sean McVay. He got outcoached by Belichick. It's a classic Belichick game, 10-3.
yeah,
It was like
that's a
13
classic
or 13.
Belichick game.
Was it 10-3 or 13?
No, 13-3.
13. It was 13.
13
because they were both
10-point deficit. Yeah,
So
that's like Belichick wins those games all day long. Remember the Bills Patriots last
where
year?
it was like freezing cold.
3 pass plays.
Yeah.
really,
Yeah. Mac Jones threw the ball 3 times and they beat the Bills.
Mac Jones was wearing like a really thick
he's wearing
wetsuit.
Yeah, he was wearing a wetsuit.
What a mess. That's some
And they
Belichick
that's a
stuff.
good idea.
That's no, it's
I
smart.
bet Belichick told him to wear that.
Someone said it was Brady because that's what Brady does in cold games.
Oh,
Mac Jones, next Tom Brady.
no.
No. All right, Mac Jones is so overrated, but that's a different thing.
Mac Jones is a good player. He fits the Patriot system, but they're not going to win a Super Bowl.
No.
I feel like we've had this argument before, and you
Within
were pro
the
Mac
next
Jones.
3 years.
I'm now anti Mac Jones.
Okay.
But I have always been and still am anti Justin Fields.
Well, I got.
I don't think he's good.
I don't think Justin Fields is good either.
I think he got
Now-
lucky with a really good game against what was it, Clemson?
Yeah.
And then
He did fight through that, though.
That's true.
He hurt his rib.
he was
Or
really good.
it was
in that,
something.
but I don't know. I think he's mid. But
I also think what. So would you say, like, what if Justin Fields and Mahomes were switched teams?
I think the Bears.
Like, I think that's a good. You think that's a good question? Like,
I don't think the
to
Chiefs
consider.
would go to. They went to 2 Super Bowls back to back, 1-1.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think they'd win any. I don't think they'd go to any.
I think they'd maybe get to the AFC Championship with Justin
Maybe.
Fields. Maybe, and that'd have to be him playing really.
Because Mahomes is so good. Like people kind of he's honestly underrated. Like he's so good.
I think people don't like his skills aren't underrated, but I think like
He's underappreciated.
Yeah.
That's the word.
I think like since like what he's done and what he's capable of doing, people just expect that out of him.
Yeah.
It's almost like Curry in the sense that like
Yeah.
people are so used to him just like pulling threes 3 feet beyond the arc that like they're just there to celebrate it, and they're like I think yeah.
And then I think Aaron Rodgers is still underappreciated too.
That's crazy for me. Like, I mean, he plays in the smallest market, like, but somehow like doesn't have any receivers ever, really, except for Devontae Adams. Like for a couple years,
How did they lose?
At one point, he had Adam Lazard,
Alan Lazard is his
Allen.
number is
I thought it
his
was
wide
Adam.
receiver 1 this year.
And I
This
picked him
next
up
year?
in fantasy in that 7th round.
So let's
After
see.
that.
This, like, back-to-back MVPs, and people still think Brady's better. It's crazy to me. I don't get it at all.
I think people think Brady's better because Brady wins.
Well, if you compare the situations, I'm just saying.
Julian Edelman's a little bit better.
What if the
than-
roles are reversed? Do you think Rodgers wins more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Rodgers, if he was on the Patriots for whatever, 18 years or something,
Yeah.
dude, that's like 10 chips.
I don't know how they would lose.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would be a crazy team.
Now,
He
would
had
you say
Mike
Brady,
McCarthy
Would you say
for
Brady
8 years.
Would you say Brady is a good quarterback if he's on the Packers and in Rodgers' situation?
Yeah. Brady's obviously a great quarterback, and he's a great leader. And Rodgers isn't. That's like
They're not 10
You
chips.
see-
They don't win 10.
Have you seen what he looks like?
They do.
If he's so bro.
All right, I got one final thing for us. I remember being very anti MLB 3 wildcard spots, but now that the Mariners are in the 3rd wildcard spot, I am totally for it. And I think we need a segment called the Mariners Wildcard Watch, because 21 years is a long time.
It'd be like a 30-second segment if you want it to be.
Perfect. We're done.
Honestly, I'm rooting for the Mariners or just any bum team to win. Just like the worst of the group, because the Giants are just a mess right
I think
now.
the Giants they haven't found like their slot. They haven't found their identity yet.
They need to rebuild, is what it is.
All right.
Like, I'm sorry. Like, I love Brandon Belt, but it's over.
Thank
About
you
Crawford.
for listening to Hot Takes.
Also over.
We'll see you next week.
Last year was fun.